Paintings. They can enrapture, they can mystify, and sometimes they can startle. Take a look at any painting, and you can guarantee that it means something different to someone else. Paintings can have such a power that it can elevate us to a state of joy. They can take us back to our childhood, or they can lift our spirits and fill us with warmth. On the other hand, paintings can take us to the darkest of worlds. They can make us dread and sink into despair, and they can also show us pain so visceral that it screams through the canvas at us. Put simply, paintings can make us feel, and few artists seem to know their feelings more than Van Gogh. I mean, just look at this fine piece of... What is this again? It's just a chair, right? Are we sure we got the right artwork? I mean, it doesn't even look that comfortable. Does it have lumbar support? It sure doesn't look like it's adjustable. Wait, that's not even an abrasion-resistant seat, is it? You call that art? Hold on. Ah, there we go. Now that's what I call a chair. Flexispot's BS1 office chair. Arguably a true work of art. Sorry, Van Gogh. Today's episode is brought to you by Flexispot. Flexispot makes some really great desks and both home and office equipment, from standing desks, gaming chairs, monitor mounts, and storage accessories. If you're anything like me, you probably spend a lot of days sitting at a desk, and you might have experienced some pain or discomfort. To combat such problems, I've been using Flexispot's BS1 office chair. Something I've struggled with when finding a good chair is finding one with a comfortable yet functional backrest. With the BS1 office chair, you not only get a sleek design and a comfortable backrest, but you can also enjoy the integrated lumbar support that not only reinforces your back, but helps against sit fatigue. What makes the BS1 office chair unique is the fully adjustable headrest, allowing you to rest your head in a position that's both stable and comfortable for you. You can also adjust the height and inclination of the chair, allowing for multiple safe choices that will suit any environment. The BS1 office chair also allows the user to maintain maximum comfort through its breathable mesh and its padded seat, both of which contribute to the chair's optimal functionality. Right now, Flexispot are offering 33% off both their BS1 office chair and their standing E7 desk. Check this video's description for links to both products and be on your way to a more balanced and enjoyable working environment. Be sure to move quickly though, as the sale only lasts from the 22nd of May to the 26th of May. And now back to today's episode. First up on our tour of the spookiest art pieces through history is The Scream by Norwegian artist Edvard Munch, which was painted in 1893. In fact, 3 versions of this piece actually exist. The original from 1893, one from 1895, and apparently another in 1910. It's no wonder Munch was so fond of painting this piece, because it was one of his most famous, one that was so popular, it was actually stolen a couple of times in the mid-90s and early 2000s. But what's actually happening in this elaborate madness? Red clouds swirl angrily in a sky that is swamped with vivid strokes. The waters churn wildly below, dominating the middle portion of the painting, whilst the earth and greenery are shoved to one side, pitted up against the blue ocean as if competing for dominance. It's a battle of the elements really, and there on a bridge is a man in turmoil, a witness to the catastrophe of the elements, a bystander to the destructiveness of the weather. This figure stands mouth agape, his hands on his face, dressed to the point that he does appear to scream right there in the middle of a bridge. Is he afraid of something we cannot see? Is he having an existential crisis? Is he overcome by the turbulence of the elements around him? Or did he just leave the stove on? Well, according to Munch himself, the piece came about from a panic attack that Munch suffered in 1892. He described the moment as taking place along a path in Oslo, where the sun was setting behind the clouds and turned the sky red as blood. He says, "I sensed the scream passing through nature. I felt as though I could actually hear the scream. I painted this picture, painted the clouds like real blood. The colours shrieked." Munch used these undulating lines to show the panic of the figure, and because these strokes have a continuous up and down movement, it does contribute to the chaoticness of the painting and the frenzy that swims through both the environment and the screaming man. By contrast, there are 2 men in the background, who don't seem to be suffering the same experience. Those who Munch confirmed were the two friends who were with him on the day. Because they are not seen to express the same wretched emotion as the screaming man, it can be assumed that the trauma comes from his own psyche, and that the savage blend of the sky, water and earth is not actually happening, it's all in his head. Interestingly, the screaming man would actually serve as inspiration for the mask of the popular slasher movies, also named Scream. On one copy of the Scream painting, Munch himself once noted that only a madman could have painted something of the like. Our next painting takes us into the battlefield, into the jaws of war, and into the depths of not just one man's madness, but perhaps legions of those who had fallen. Created in 1941 by Salvador Dali, the face of war shows us what appears to be multiple faces emerging from the eyes and mouth of an overarching face. All the faces appear to be identical, mirroring the trembling, distraught and verklempt expression that riddles what we can only presume is Dali's interpretation of the face of war. Considering the time period, Dali portrays a more honest reflection of war that was perhaps too brutally candid when soldiers were being shipped off to fight and die. When we consider the governmental effort of painting war as this patriotic, heroic, and even fulfilling adventure, seldom were the downfalls of war ever depicted, for this would be counterintuitive during recruitment. After all, the downsides of war were obvious, but the emotions behind these downsides were likely swept under the rug. You wouldn't see war depicted as a distressed face, but instead a courageous one. Dali knew something of the emotions of war. Though not directly a soldier, he did live through the Second World War in France, and was there to see the fall of France when it was captured by Germany. However, the painting in question is believed to have been inspired by the Spanish Civil War between 1936 and 1939, and that this war was what made the most impression on Dali. In any case, the painting appears to be linear in its objective, to convey not the triumph or the heroics or the valorousness of war, but instead the misery. The face appears to stare at perhaps both friend and foe, its quivering eyes almost voicing a notion that it doesn't want to die, but it doesn't want to kill either. So the expression is torn between living and dying. Another interesting feature of this piece are the snakes, or perhaps worms, that slither around its sides. Perhaps a nod to the snake's devious imagery, or perhaps a nod to the nature of worms, which consume the flesh of the dead when they are buried. In the bottom right, there appears to be the inklings of what might be a skeletal hand. That which Dali confirmed was actually his own imprint upon the piece. To the unsuspecting eye though, one might wonder if this is the hand of a soldier, whose flesh has rotted away after having fallen in battle. Considering the desert-esque background, is this a battlefield that the face finds itself on? Is that despair in its eyes actually horror, as it views a landscape of corpses, the very casualties of war? Worse yet, the most striking technique used on this painting are the infinite faces. The faces within the faces, if you will. One might argue that this is symbolic for the amount of victims in war, an endless amount. Another idea is that this is the depth of sorrow and grief that one experiences, courtesy of warfare. It knows no bounds, it is unlimited, and for some people, the wounds last forever, psychological and otherwise. Perhaps the tragedy of war can be further symbolized by the colours Dali uses. Dark, grimy colours for the face that we don't see in humans, perhaps to suggest sadness, loneliness, or maybe something that's more monstrous. Perhaps it is not human. Not anymore. Looking at the animal kingdom, there are many large beasts that might strike terror into our very souls if we were to encounter them. A berserk bear might claw us to death. A terrifying tiger might slash us to pieces. A cunning crocodile might snap us up in its jaws. And then there's the spider. Now I know what you're thinking with this one. Kill it with fire, and I'm inclined to agree. But for French painter Odilon Redon, the smiling spider, painted in 1887, is more than just a creepy crawly. It's a representation of one man's fascination with not only the colour black, but the inhabitants of life that could exist on another dimensional plane. Indeed, one look at this creature with its humanoid smile, its hulking body, and its 10 legs is enough to have us thinking it belongs in a Lovecraft story. Indeed, the smiling spider's objective may not be to elicit fear, unless you're arachnophobic, although it's quite unsettling. It grins at us like it knows something we don't. Its one eye indicates that it might be winking at us, further proof of its surreptitiousness. It stands imposingly on only 5 of its legs, and you might say it could be doing one of 2 things, waving at us or warding us off. Redon was a part of the symbolist movement, which was all about conveying meaning and truth through illustration. The symbolist wasn't bound to traditional ideas or realism or even physics. If they wanted a 10-legged spider, they'd paint a 10-legged spider, and you'd pay thousands and thousands of dollars to own it. Dreams, visions, the very imagination itself could be splattered on the canvas, and in the case of the smiling spider, it could be a reflection of Redon's interest in science, most specifically, the microscopic world, only known to us by the microscope. Could this smiling spider be a peek into what Redon conceived was living in this tiny world? Was this a friendly critter scuttling through the microverse, whose presence would be inconsequential to us? Or was it something more sinister, lurking in a space that we cannot comprehend? The beauty of it is that we cannot disprove Redon's imagery. We can only really hope that it's not malicious, and perhaps that it doesn't exist at all. Most of Redon's artwork tended to be noirs, dark, wild, and/or otherworldly, with a lot of implied supernaturalism. He appeared to love the colour black, which is evident in his other lithographs, stating that one must respect black. It does not please the eye and it awakens no sensuality. It is the agent of the mind, far more than the most beautiful colour to the palette or prism. For Redon, black was the most concise way to convey what bizarre essences he imagined could exist, those which were something between science and fantasy. If we were going to burn the last piece of art, then we'd probably want to get the holy water out for this one. We aren't talking about metaphorical screams, consequences of war, or big-ass spiders, no. Here we're talking about something that's far more supernatural. What we are shown here at first glance could be many things. A pope being raptured, a holy man revealing himself to have allegiance with the devil, a possessed priest even. Just his howling expression alone is enough to give us the creeps, and I'm sure you'll agree it looks like something that could belong in one of the Conjuring movies, as opposed to a collection from the early 1950s. It was British painter Francis Bacon who was responsible for this unusual piece, one that depicts Pope Innocent X, who doesn't really look that innocent in this depiction. Some say that this portrait was inspired by a 17th century portrait of the same subject by Spanish painter Diego Velázquez, but where Velázquez went for realism and perhaps a more flattering light of the Pope, Bacon went the complete other way, giving him vibrant colours of black and purple, styling him with a screaming expression, and using rather strong brushstrokes for the background, which to me inadvertently looks like a Saiyan charging up to deliver his final move. Around 50 paintings of the Pope were drawn by Bacon between the 1950s and the 1960s, and while some might see this as a fascination or even a muse, others might argue it was a bit of a strange obsession to have. Why draw a Pope who existed some 300 years prior to Bacon? Yet more pressingly, why draw him in such an arguably fearsome light? Some have suggested that this was a critique of Christianity by Bacon, who wished to show the Pope as no more a special man than any other, but a man who despite his innocence was indeed still a man. He had a dark side too, a side that would not be congruent with the principles of his religion. He had urges, he sinned, and more importantly, he was not divine, but merely someone appointed the role by the organisation of the church. Put simply, it might be said that Bacon's piece provoked people into keeping the Pope, and maybe the people in power in general, in perspective. Another concept is that Bacon sympathised with the Pope. He viewed him as a tragic figure, who despite his own views and personality may have been suppressed in order to maintain what might have been a very public facade. The vertical white lines here that might make you think of Pope Innocent X as a Z-fighter can also be seen as a cage And that infamous screaming expression is his reaction to virtually being held a prisoner in his role. He cannot say or do what he pleases, he must act in accordance with the church at all times, and with such extreme pressure, he might be forgiven for his violent screaming as he contemplates his metaphorical cell. It is amusing to compare Velázquez's noble, guiltless, serene interpretation of Pope Innocent X with its royal red to emphasize power, the gilded endowment to emphasize status, and the vivid white to emphasize purity. Whereas, when we look at Bacon's interpretation, we see he appears to deconstruct these ideas and paints the Pope as terrifying with his maniacal expression, ferocious with the garish use of purple, and also disingenuous and fake as he swaps Velázquez's golden throne for a crude yellow one. Many of the paintings in today's episode can be described as a nightmare, but the next painting in our horrifying lineup truly is a nightmare, perhaps the nightmare as it's so appropriately named. Swiss painter Henri Fuseli debuted this rather intense and visual piece in 1782 at the Royal Academy of London. Considering the striking imagery, it's no surprise that Fuseli was an overnight success. The scene is quite candid, intimate almost, and shows a more vulnerable side of humanity that many of us take for granted when we're asleep. Here we see a woman draped over her bed, seemingly unconscious, as what appears to be a spirit, or some kind of demon, perches atop her chest. Additionally, we can also see what some have interpreted as a horse emerging from the shadows, which may supply a bit of a spin on the nightmare title, by showing us a mare that comes in the night. The most common idea surrounding this piece is that this is a visual metaphor for our own nightmares. The evil spirit that sits atop us as we sleep is the nightmare, and we are powerless to do anything about it until we wake, hence the woman's rather defenseless pose. Nightmares can be powerful experiences. We can convince ourselves of their authenticity. We experience fear and dread. We can even have physical reactions, such as striking out in the night, waking up in a cold sweat, or even wetting ourselves. With this in mind, this demonic gremlin here personifies the nightmare quite perfectly, a gruesome fellow who appears to deliver nothing but bad intentions. What's interesting about him is his facial expression. He is menacing, yes. He is ugly, yes. But most importantly, he actually looks annoyed, as if we've just walked in and caught him in his dastardly act of plaguing this woman's sleep. Notice how he doesn't actually look at the woman. His gaze is reserved for us, and because we've disturbed him, and possibly disturbed her from her sleep, he will have no choice but to dematerialize. Another common interpretation of this dream maintains some sexual connotation. The question must be asked, is this a demon that preys on people when they sleep, akin to the incubus and the succubus? Is this woman about to be subjugated to some kind of rape at the hands of this supernatural miscreant? It's entirely possible, especially when we consider how common such tales were of men sleeping with succubuses who stole their semen and women sleeping with incubuses. Centuries earlier, many witchcraft trials did revolve around the suspicion that accused witches were sleeping with the devil, or fathering children through his offspring. So it's possible that this nightmare is drawing on inspiration from these dark historical accounts. We could even compare the painting to Incubus by 18th century Austrian painter Vincenz Kinninger, where much of the same symbolism applies: a helpless woman in bed, supernatural beings who gather on top of her, and the devious promise of something sinister. The exact meaning behind nightmare, however, is unknown, for Fuseli never detailed his motivations for the piece. A more outlandish interpretation is that Fuseli was in love with a woman named Anna Landhold, but as his love was unrequited, he drew himself as the demon, about the only way he could be intimate with her, but not without feeling like a beast about it. The Italian Renaissance style appears to have also inspired Fuseli here, considering the myriad of paintings that contain sleeping women sprawled out on a bed. All in all, when we consider the piece from an artistic perspective, it does evoke many different feelings: fear of what the demon will do to her, curiosity over what will transpire, and the weighty sense that perhaps we're interrupting something private, intimate, and maybe a tad bit horrific. Our final painting of the evening takes us into the realm of Greek mythology, perhaps more accurately, the final years of the fabled Golden Age. This was a time when the gods and the mortals lived together in peace and harmony, but it was also a time when the king of the gods, Cronus, was slipping into madness, a precursor to the end of tranquility. Spanish painter Francisco Goya was known for his paintings that demonstrated profound suffering. Such is the case here, with the god Cronus, or Saturn in Roman, consuming his son. This was believed to be a man who lived in particularly troubled times in the aftermath of the French Revolution, where continental strife was all the rage. Furthermore, Goya was known to suffer from bouts of deep depression, which you might say certainly gets actualized in some of his more graphic paintings. Of some of these paintings, you might call them vividly graphic, bestial, nightmarish even, which is how one might choose to describe their depression. To begin with, Goya painted more uplifting illustrations on the walls of his farmhouse, but as he succumbed to his depression, his paintings, which would become to be known as the Black Paintings, began to emulate more disturbing and violent imagery, those that some believe reflected his depression and his fear of death. Goya had never made these paintings public, which makes it even more sad. He suffered in his depression alone, using these more monstrous paintings as an outlet for his darker emotions. Interestingly, the paintings themselves weren't actually found until 50 years after his death, and only then were they transferred from his farmhouse walls to canvas. As Goya had never made them public, he had never spoken of them either, so we might never know the true inspiration behind such ferocious imagery. As many may know, the Roman myth of Saturn eating his own children comes from the tale that Saturn, king of the gods, came to learn of a prophecy that he would be overthrown by one of his children. In order to prevent this from happening, Saturn consumed his children moments after they were born. In the end, Saturn's sixth son, Jupiter, or Zeus, is able to escape such a fate, and later returns to slay his father, as the prophecy had predicted. The mythology itself is by no means as graphic as Goya's illustration. We are just simply told that Saturn consumed his children, and there is no indication as to Saturn's mind frame as he does this. Is he sad? Is he conflicted? Is he repulsed by his own actions? These details are left to our own imagination, but Goya portrays something that's far more definitive. His depiction of Saturn is like that of a frenzied madman, a psychopath who cannot control himself as he sinks his teeth into the flesh of his own child. Worse yet, this is not a god who is merciful with the killing of his child. He devours the child's head. He ravishes what is essentially food to him, and considering his maniacal expression, one might say he relishes in it. His grip on the child is most troublesome. It's almost like how you or I might hold a sandwich, though when you consider the white of his knuckles, it really demonstrates the zealousness of Saturn, who squeezed the body with such an intensity that it drained the blood from his hands. His naked appearance and disheveled unkempt hair is even more unsettling. This isn't a civilized god, he's a wild barbarian, whose rigid stance and wide-eyed gaze is truly vicious, and certainly exemplary of hysterical insanity. And so concludes our tour of history's most horrific paintings. If you have any more I've missed, be sure to let me know in the comments below, and as always, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe for more content just like this. Until next time.